Hi, welcome. Enjoy the content, subscribe, and turn on notifications.
Jake had always been a practical man, dedicated to his work and family, especially his wife, Ashley, and their daughter, Anne. They had built a life together based on love, respect, and trust, or so Jake believed. In recent months, however, he began to feel that something had changed. At first, it was just barely noticeable details, like the way Ashley avoided his gaze when talking about her day, or how she seemed more distracted, her mind elsewhere. Jake tried to push these doubts aside, reminding himself of all the happy years they'd spent together, the times when Ashley was his inseparable companion. Maybe it was just the fatigue of routine or the stress of raising a young daughter and the pressures of work. But as the days passed, the signs became more evident and increasingly disturbing. There was that night when Ashley went out to meet her friends. She used to do this often, but Jake noticed that lately these outings were becoming more regular, almost as if she were looking for an excuse to be away from home. When she returned late that night, the strong scent of perfume, not hers, but something different, lingered in the air. Jake, however, decided not to ask anything. The fear of the answer made him swallow his doubt. He told himself he didn't want to seem jealous or controlling. But the truth was different, he was scared of what he might discover. As the weeks went by, Jake began to notice even more inconsistencies. Ashley now closed herself off in her own world. Family dinners became monotonous and empty, filled with uncomfortable silences. He asked questions about her work, about the friends she was seeing, but the answers were always vague, lacking details. Something was wrong, he knew it. She avoided intimate moments, and when they did happen, they were no longer the same. That deep connection, the complicity that had always been a pillar of their relationship, seemed to have disappeared. The turning point came on a Friday night. Jake had left work early, eager to spend time with Ashley and Anne, planning a quiet family evening. However, as soon as he walked into the house, he saw her getting ready to go out again. "Where are you going?" he asked, trying to hide the tone of frustration in his voice. Ashley, without even looking at him, casually said, "I'm going out with the girls again. I need to relax a bit." That response, so cold and disinterested, echoed in Jake's mind. It wasn't just the fact that she was going out, it was the way she was distancing herself from him. He stood there, watching her as she finished getting ready. And it was at that moment that something inside him broke. The trust he had always had in her was disintegrating, and the suspicions he had tried to ignore finally became too strong to silence. Jake didn't know what he would do, but he knew he couldn't go on like this. He couldn't live in doubt, trapped between the fear of losing his wife and the uncertainty of what was really happening. He needed to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. And so, that night, something changed within Jake. The pain of impending betrayal began to transform into a firm resolve. He would follow Ashley, discover the truth with his own eyes. Jake spent the weekend in a whirlwind of thoughts. The idea of following Ashley consumed him but also filled him with guilt. He didn't want to be that kind of husband, distrustful and controlling his wife's every move, but the anguish was stronger than any other feeling. Every time she left the house with a distant smile and returned later than usual, something inside him screamed that he was losing control of the situation, that he was losing Ashley. That night, Jake decided he could no longer live with the uncertainty. He needed an answer, no matter how devastating it might be. So, the following Friday, when Ashley said again that she was going out with friends, Jake already had a plan. As soon as she grabbed her keys and walked out the door, he waited a few minutes and, almost automatically, as if on autopilot, grabbed his coat and car keys. His heart was racing, but his mind was focused. He got into his car and, keeping a safe distance, began to follow Ashley's vehicle through the city streets. The silence inside the car was oppressive. Every turn, every traffic light, was a mix of tension and fear of what he might discover. He kept his headlights low, trying his best not to draw attention. The night traffic was light, which made the task of following without being noticed even more difficult. Jake watched her every move with keen eyes, feeling his stomach churn with each mile traveled. To his surprise, Ashley didn't go to the bar where she usually met her friends but instead to an expensive restaurant on the other side of town, a place they used to frequent together on birthdays and special occasions. This isn't a girls' night out, he thought as he parked his car in a distant spot. From afar, he could see her getting out of the car, adjusting her hair with a calmness that made him even more suspicious. Jake felt a tightness in his chest as he watched her enter the restaurant. What would he do now? Part of him wanted to go in there, confront her in front of everyone. But another part, the more rational one, knew he needed proof, something to confirm his suspicions before acting rashly. Determined, he grabbed his cell phone and, keeping his distance, got out of the car and walked slowly toward the restaurant entrance. Luckily, he found a perfect vantage point, a discreet corner near one of the windows where he could see everything without being noticed. And it was there, standing in the darkness, that Jake saw what he feared most. Ashley was seated at a candlelit table, but she wasn't alone. Beside her was a man Jake had never seen before. He seemed comfortable, confident, as if he'd known Ashley for a long time. They talked and laughed casually, and with each affectionate gesture, Jake felt a stab in his chest. His fingers trembled as he filmed the scene with his cell phone. The pain of seeing the woman he loved on a date with another man was almost unbearable, but he knew he had to keep going. Then the thing he feared most happened. The man took Ashley's hand from across the table, and she didn't pull away. On the contrary, she smiled and leaned slightly toward him, as if that connection were natural. Jake felt his heart race, and for a second, he almost dropped his cell phone. The world around him seemed to dissolve. The voices in the restaurant, the sound of passing cars, all became distant. He could only hear the heavy beating of his heart and the muffled sound of his breathing. He had hoped he was mistaken, that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but now it was clear, what he feared was true. Jake continued filming, knowing that without this record, it would be just his word against Ashley's. But even with the cell phone in hand, part of him didn't want to believe what he was seeing. Part of him still hoped it was some kind of nightmare from which he would wake up. When Jake returned home that night, the weight of the newly discovered truth seemed to crush him. The video on his cell phone was proof of everything he feared, and despite having hoped for an explanation, for some kind of misunderstanding, now he knew with painful clarity that there was no room for doubt. Ashley was cheating on him, and he had seen it with his own eyes. Even so, the reality of the situation didn't seem any less surreal. The house, usually cozy and welcoming, now felt cold, strange, as if the home he knew no longer existed. He went in and immediately headed to Anne's room, just to see her sleeping peacefully. The simple sound of her soft breathing made a knot tighten even more in his chest. That little girl, whom he loved more than anything, had no idea what was about to happen to her family. Jake looked at her for a long moment, unable to shake the thought that everything he did from that moment on would be for her. After some time, he left the room and went to the living room, sitting silently on the couch. The anger and pain were boiling inside him, but he knew that confronting Ashley right then, in the heat of the moment, might not be the best choice. He needed clarity, he needed to think about what to do, and he couldn't lose his head. Jake closed his eyes and tried to control his breathing. What he really wanted was to scream, to demand answers, but he knew that wouldn't bring the answers he needed, and certainly wouldn't help protect Anne. A few hours passed, and finally, he heard the sound of the door opening. Ashley entered with light steps, as if nothing wrong had happened, as if that night were just like so many others. She closed the door softly and headed to the kitchen, not realizing that Jake was there, sitting in the dark, watching her every move. There was something about her tranquility that irritated him deeply, as if the betrayal were just an unimportant detail. She took off her coat and placed it on the chair, grabbing a glass of water before finally noticing Jake on the couch. "Jake? You're awake?" The surprise in her voice seemed genuine, as if the night had been completely ordinary, as if she hadn't just returned from a romantic date with another man. He watched her for a moment, trying to stay calm, resisting the urge to confront her right then, but emotional exhaustion overcame him. He shook his head slowly, feeling he didn't have the strength to deal with everything at that moment. "Yes, I am. Just, couldn't sleep." Ashley stood still for a moment, looking at him as if trying to understand what was wrong. "Are you okay? You look tired." The casual tone of the question was what almost made him lose control, but he took a deep breath again. "Not now. Not like this." "I'm tired, yes," he replied, looking at the floor, feeling the weight of all the unspoken words. "I'll go to bed in a minute." Ashley watched him for a few more seconds but seemed convinced there was nothing more to discuss. She gave a half-smile, perhaps relieved not to have to deal with a difficult conversation that night, and then headed to the bedroom. Jake watched her disappear down the hallway, each of her steps echoing in the silent house. He remained there, motionless, for a few more minutes. The scene at the restaurant still pulsed in his mind like a film on endless repeat, but he knew that this wasn't the right time to face everything at once. He needed to think, to organize his thoughts, and above all, to prepare for what was to come. Deep down, he knew the confrontation was inevitable, but he didn't want to do it in the heat of the moment. That night, Jake made the decision to wait. The next day would bring the conversation he so dreaded, but for now, he simply needed a moment to process everything. The next morning, the weight of the decision Jake had made the night before was still present. He woke up before Ashley, his body tired, his mind exhausted from the few hours of sleep, but with a painful clarity. It was time to confront her. As difficult and uncertain as the conversation would be, he knew he couldn't continue living with doubt and resentment. More than that, he knew and deserved the truth, even if she was still too young to understand what was about to happen to her family. While making coffee, Jake replayed in his head how the conversation would unfold. He didn't want to yell, he didn't want it to turn into a pointless argument full of accusations. He just wanted the truth. He wanted to understand what had happened for their marriage to crumble like this. How had he and Ashley reached this point? Was there any chance of redemption, or was the trust so broken that there was no turning back? The sound of footsteps in the hallway pulled him out of these thoughts. Ashley appeared in the kitchen doorway, yawning, as if it were just another ordinary morning. "Good morning," she said casually as she walked toward the coffee maker. Jake didn't respond immediately, just watched her in silence, trying to decipher that apparent normalcy. She was acting as if the night before had never happened, as if she hadn't spent hours with another man. The anger and sadness grew inside Jake again, but he forced himself to remain calm. He had to deal with this with a clear head, as hard as it was. After a few minutes of silence, Ashley sat at the table with her coffee, finally noticing the tense atmosphere. "You're acting strange today," she commented, looking at him with a raised eyebrow, having no idea what was about to happen. Jake took a deep breath, feeling his heart beat faster. "We need to talk, Ashley," he said, keeping his voice as controlled as possible. The words weighed like stones in his mouth, but he knew it was the only way to move forward. Ashley frowned, perhaps trying to grasp the gravity of the moment. "About what?" she asked, without any sign of nervousness. She still seemed calm, confident that nothing had changed since the night before. "I know," Jake said, looking directly at her. "I know what you're doing." She blinked, confused for a brief second, but then something in her eyes changed. She understood. "What are you talking about?" she asked, but the tone of her voice was no longer so carefree. Jake didn't avert his gaze. "I followed you last night. I saw you with that man at the restaurant. I filmed everything." The words came out faster than he expected, and the tension in the air became almost palpable. He could feel his heart pounding in his ears, and for a moment, everything seemed to stop. Ashley was silent for a few moments, staring at him with an expression that shifted between shock and anger. He had expected some emotional reaction, perhaps regret, maybe apologies, something that showed she still cared about what they had built. But instead, she raised her chin, crossing her arms defensively. "You followed me? Recorded me without my consent?" she said, her voice colder now, with a hint of disdain. "That's illegal, Jake. You know you're committing a crime, right?" Jake could hardly believe what he was hearing. She didn't deny it. She didn't try to explain or give any justification. Her only reaction was to try to shift the focus onto him, making him seem like the guilty one. He felt a surge of disbelief mixed with anger. How could she be so cold, so manipulative after everything? "You're accusing me of a crime after what I saw last night," he replied firmly. "Do you think that will change anything? I'm not interested in fights. What matters to me now is Anne. And I'll do whatever it takes to ensure she's safe." Ashley narrowed her eyes, clearly not expecting that response. "So that's it? You're going to take me out of her life? Use that video for what? To make me lose custody of my own daughter?" "If necessary, yes," Jake answered without hesitation. "I don't want to fight, Ashley. But if you're willing to betray our family like this, how can I trust that you're taking care of Anne the way she deserves?" Her expression hardened even more. She was silent for a few seconds, as if trying to calculate her next move. "You have no idea what you're doing," she said slowly. "I'm going to sue you for this, Jake. You're making a serious mistake by following me and recording me. You'll regret it." Jake remained calm, even in the face of her threats. He knew the road ahead would be complicated, but he was prepared to fight. "Maybe you're right, Ashley. Maybe I crossed some lines. But what you did can't be ignored either. And I'll make sure Anne is with someone who can truly take care of her." The silence between them seemed endless. Jake felt the weight of her words, but he knew he couldn't back down. He had crossed a line by following and filming Ashley, but she had crossed a much bigger line by betraying their family's trust and stability. Now, everything depended on how they would deal with the consequences. Without another word, Ashley stood up from the table, her expression cold and calculating. "This isn't over yet, Jake," she said before leaving the kitchen. Jake knew that the battle in court would be the hardest of his life. After confronting Ashley and receiving the threat of a lawsuit for invasion of privacy, he knew he would have to make delicate decisions. He had filmed Ashley without her permission, which, from a legal standpoint, could be considered a violation of privacy, especially if the recording were used against her in court. But for Jake, the focus wasn't just the video itself but the life of his daughter, Anne. And so he decided to proceed with the custody request, aware of the risks. Before heading to court, Jake consulted a trusted lawyer specializing in family law. The conversation with the lawyer was revealing. "Jake, we need to be very careful with the video. Depending on the judge's interpretation, it might be inadmissible as evidence. Violation of privacy is a serious issue, and the defense could use that to divert focus. However, our argument won't be based solely on the video. We need to present a broader case that shows a pattern of negligence on Ashley's part." The guidance was clear. The video, though an emotional key piece for Jake, could be contested. But there were other ways to show the court that Anne's custody should be his. Jake began compiling additional evidence, testimonies from neighbors, reports of Anne's behavior at school, and even records of the nights Ashley stayed out, claiming to be with friends, but actually absent for long periods. On the day of the hearing, Jake's nervousness was palpable, but he knew he had done his best to prepare a solid case. He entered the courtroom alongside his lawyer, while Ashley stood on the other side with her legal counsel, who seemed ready for a legal battle. As expected, Ashley's lawyer immediately attacked the issue of the recording. He argued that Jake had violated Ashley's right to privacy by following and filming her without her consent. "This video is inadmissible, Your Honor, as it was obtained illegally. Jake has no right to use private recordings to build his case, her lawyer confidently stated. Jake looked at his own lawyer, concerned. He knew that could complicate things, but his counsel was prepared. When it was his turn to speak, Jake's lawyer didn't focus on the video but on Anne's well-being. Your Honor, although the recording is under debate, our case doesn't rely solely on it. Our priority here is what's best for the child. We can prove that Ms. Ashley has neglected her parental responsibilities, staying out of the home for long periods and putting her own priorities above her daughter's needs. It was at this moment that the case began to take a different turn. The judge, though aware of the legal complications of the video, started questioning Ashley about her behavior. Jake had provided other documents and witnesses that showed a troubling pattern, and had spent several nights under the care of others while Ashley was absent without explanation. Teachers from Anne's school testified that the girl seemed more anxious and distracted in recent weeks. Ashley's lawyer tried to counter, saying that her behavior was irrelevant to her ability to be a good mother and that Jake was trying to manipulate the situation to take custody of Anne. But Ashley's coldness, especially in light of evidence of her constant absence, began to weigh against her. Then the judge spoke. This court is concerned about Anne's well-being. While the video is an issue to be discussed, the behavior demonstrated by Ms. Ashley raises concerns about her ability to be present as a mother. Custody is not an automatic right. It is a responsibility that involves commitment, and based on what I've heard so far, that commitment is in doubt. The judge's final decision was clear and carefully reasoned. He didn't entirely invalidate the video but treated it cautiously, considering that the additional evidence, especially the testimonies and records of Ashley's absence, were sufficient to grant primary custody to Jake. The judge ordered that Ashley would have supervised visitation rights for a period until she demonstrated stability and commitment to Anne. Ashley, who had entered the hearing confident that the video would be her biggest defense, was caught off guard. She tried to maintain her composure, but her coldness and disdain throughout the process now worked against her. When the judge delivered his decision, she shot a furious look at Jake, but he didn't waver. Leaving the court with custody of Anne, Jake knew that victory hadn't been easy or without scars. He had lost something along the way, the trust in the person with whom he thought he'd spend his life. But more important than anything, he knew he could now focus on what truly mattered, raising Anne in a safe, stable, and loving environment. The great lesson Jake learned is that although the pain of betrayal is devastating, the focus must always be on the well-being of the most vulnerable, and in this case, it was Anne. And he was prepared to do whatever was necessary to ensure her future, even if it meant leaving behind the life he once knew. Thank you for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you won't miss any updates. See you next time.